On the night of May 22nd, 2010, a football club is standing at the very top of European football. 5 years later, that same club has been sold twice, finished ninth in its own league, and watched almost every star from that golden night walk out the door. The answer to how this happened was written, slowly and painfully, in the years that followed Madrid. This is the story of how Inter Milan, the champions of Europe, became one of football's most painful cautionary tales. To understand the fall, you have to first see how high the peak really was. Inter Milan in 2010 were not just successful, they were the final, most mature version of a project built patiently, year after year, stone upon stone. Massimo Moratti, an oil heir who had owned the club since 1995, had spent fortunes trying to follow in his father's footsteps. Year after year, he added stars to the squad. Year after year, Inter failed to reach the greatness everyone expected of them. Then, in the mid-2000s, everything began to align. In 2006, the Calciopoli scandal shook Italian football to its foundations. Juventus were stripped of 2 league titles, and Milan were weakened. Inter inherited the throne, and for 5 seasons in a row, they kept it. The summer of 2008 marked the beginning of José Mourinho's journey at the San Siro. Within 2 seasons, he turned Inter from a dominant domestic side into a European force. By 2009-10, Inter's squad had become a war machine, solid on every front. Julio César in goal, Lucio and Samuel anchoring the defense, Maicon attacking down the right, Chivu on the left, Cambiasso and the captain, Javier Zanetti, commanding the midfield, Sneijder pulling the strings behind Eto'o, Milito, and Pandev. And the average age of that starting 11, close to 30, keep that number in the back of your mind. We'll come back to it shortly. The 2009-10 season was the finest example of football where passion was balanced by discipline. Inter won the league by 2 points. They beat Roma in the Coppa Italia final, and then came the European run that defined an era. In the semi-final, they traveled to the Camp Nou with a 3-1 lead against the greatest club side of a generation, Pep Guardiola's Barcelona. They played most of the second leg with 10 men. They were behind in every statistic, in shots, in passes, in distance covered. But on the pitch, they never broke, not even once. When the final whistle blew, Mourinho sprinted across the pitch in celebration. It remains one of the iconic images of modern football. The final in Madrid almost felt like a formality. Diego Milito scored twice. Bayern Munich never recovered. Inter were champions of Europe for the first time in 45 years. But within the very night of that championship, a goodbye no one had noticed had already begun. Inside the dressing room, José Mourinho told his players he was leaving for Real Madrid. The architect of this great structure was walking out the door, and what remained was a truth everyone was choosing to ignore. The empire had grown old, exhausted, and unsustainable. There is a truth football history keeps showing us. The years that follow a treble are more dangerous for a club than the peak itself. Champions grow older, their replacements come at a higher price, and the hunger to win slowly gives way to comfort. Inter would experience all 3 at once. Mourinho's first replacement was Rafael Benitez. He lasted 6 months. After him came Leonardo, then Gasperini, then Ranieri, then Stramaccioni. In just 2 years, 5 different names sat in the same chair. Each one tried to rebuild, and each one inherited the same problem. The squad that had won the treble was aging together, and there was no second generation behind them. And the transfer policy gradually began to fall apart. Inter spent on players brought in to replace Wesley Sneijder, on forwards who never adapted to Serie A, on defenders who simply could not keep up. Meanwhile, the wage bill stayed enormous. Massimo Moratti kept writing checks, but the returns shrank with every season. In 2011-12, Inter finished 6th. In 2012-13, they finished 9th. For a club that only 5 years earlier had been the sole ruler of the league, 9th place was not a loss of form. It was the end of an era. And behind the scenes, something even more serious was happening. Italian football itself was sinking. Attendances were falling. Television money was being left behind by England and Spain. UEFA's new financial fair play rules were tightening. Inter were spending like a superpower in a league that no longer produced superpower revenue. By 2013, Massimo Moratti had run out of options. The Moratti family had poured around 1.5 billion euros into Inter over nearly 2 decades. The club was losing money every season. Financial fair play penalties were coming. A buyer was needed. That buyer arrived from Jakarta. In November 2013, Indonesian businessman Erick Thohir purchased 70% of Inter Milan. Moratti stepped back. For the first time in close to 20 years, Inter were no longer a Moratti club. The Thohir era began with the promise of modernization. What was left behind was confusion. Transfer strategies shifted from one window to the next. The manager's chair never had time to cool. Mazzarri, Mancini again, De Boer, Pioli. For a club of Inter's size, Champions League qualification used to be a formality. Now, it had turned into a year-long anxiety. By 2016, Thohir himself was looking for a way out. That summer, Suning Holdings, a Chinese retail giant led by the Zhang family, took over the club. A club that had lifted 3 European Cups was now part of the portfolio of a holding company that sold electronic goods in eastern China. The treble already felt like a memory from another century. Look at the numbers, and the scale of the collapse becomes clear. Between 2010 and 2016, Inter missed the Champions League 4 times. Once regarded as one of the 5 most powerful clubs in the world, this time they had completely dropped out of the top 20 in the coefficient rankings. Their wage-to-revenue ratio, the metric UEFA watches most closely, was one of the worst in all of Europe. The squad was transformed top to bottom at an unprecedented speed. Of the 11 players who had started the 2010 Champions League final, only one, Javier Zanetti, was still at the club by 2014, and he retired that summer. The spirit that had lived through the treble walked out the door player by player, and a new generation to take its place never arrived. The city of Milan itself shifted. The San Siro, once a fortress, hosted half-empty midweek games. The ultras protested. Sponsors hesitated. Pirelli, the tire company that had been associated with the Inter shirt for more than 2 decades, eventually decided to part ways with the club. For older fans, the most painful part was not the losing, it was the irrelevance. Inter was no longer a success being talked about. They had become an example to be avoided. Some see this collapse as the sum of bad coincidences, poor managerial choices, failed transfers, decisions that came at the wrong time. But the deeper truth lay at the root of this story, in a structural problem. A team built for one final push, an owner unafraid of spending on glory, but a league in decline. Inter won the treble at the intersection of these 3 conditions. When the push ended, none of those conditions could be repeated. It is the same story that has haunted AC Milan, Valencia, and so many other former giants of European football. Glory built on personal fortunes and aging stars rarely survives the moment its architect walks away. On that Madrid night in 2010, it looked as if no one could ever defeat Inter Milan. Within 5 years, almost everything that had made them great was gone. The treble was not the beginning of an era. It was the end of one. And yet, even now, 15 years later, the photo of Mourinho frozen on the pitch with his arms outstretched remains one of the most powerful images in football, because victory, no matter how great, is fleeting, And empires, even when built on the firmest foundations, cannot stand forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. More videos like this are on the way. See you in the next one.